You're watching the Chucktown Wind Report Extended Weekend Outlook from Friday, September the 18th through Monday, September the 21st. Okay, so we have lots to talk about this weekend as the National Hurricane Center has given this area a higher chance this morning of subtropical or tropical development. Now, they've given it a 20% chance in the next 2 days and 40% chance in the next 5 days. The thing is, this area will head off to the northeast and away from the coastlines, so we're not expecting any kind of major land impact other than maybe some waves, a slight wind field, and some clouding. Maybe a little bit of rain here and there as it heads off to the northeast, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. It was circled here Wednesday night to cross northern Florida and into the Atlantic to develop, and that's exactly what happened. Now, I did talk a little bit about high pressure to the north above these frontal boundaries on Wednesday. I gave a little update in the Chucktown Wind Report, and we talk about clockwise winds along a frontal boundary as they wedge down. This is sinking air. We get low pressures along the tail end of these frontal boundaries. That's convergent air, where air is actually coming towards the center in a counterclockwise rotation. So this wind diving down here and then helping to spin these low pressures sometimes can get them into tropical cyclones, especially as they enter over water and the Gulf Stream. So the Gulf Stream right now is about 83 degrees, so it's pretty ripe for a tropical cyclone to develop there. The mid upper level wind patterns are pretty favorable right where it is and along the eastern side. However, this western side where this drier air is, there is some upper level shear going on, so we don't think that the western side of this storm will be anything large. It should stay fairly sheared off on the western side, and most of the convection stay off to the east. So I'm not expecting anything significant out of this storm, but just something to watch for the next couple of days. Now, with that said, we do have a very large ridge of high pressure built in over this area. Now, this high pressure in the middle has weakened and is starting to erode as these are the more dominant high pressures here. And that's mostly in part by a dip in the jet stream starting to show a frontal boundary pushing down into the southeast region. Now, we do have high pressure here in the Appalachians that is providing a northeasterly flow this morning. So when we talk about winds in the southeast for today and tomorrow, we're going to be talking about a fading pattern tomorrow. Today's going to be a little bit tricky, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. But just know that we have another frontal boundary dropping down with another large dome of high pressure coming in right behind it to set up a very similar pattern of what we saw this week, where high pressure comes down and settles right here in this area to give us another round of northeasterly or easterly winds. So that's to be expected. Not to worry about this one until Sunday, and it's going to be fairly weak when it gets here because of all the dry air ahead of it and a dry air behind it. So I'm not expecting very much rain unless it does make a stronger connection in the Gulf, where we have another similar setup to what we're seeing right now with low pressure to the south and high pressure to the north. So we may have a couple of rounds, and that's some of those homegrown storms during the peak season of the hurricane season. So we're kind of beyond the peak and getting into the downward slope of it, but it's always something that we have to keep an eye on. All right, so I want to look at the jet stream real quick. We talked about the dip in the jet stream. This is 300 millibars, about 30,000 feet up, and you see this dip coming across the country. It doesn't look as deep as the last one down to the southeast, but it should be enough to get that frontal boundary across to our coastline. So we're going to keep an eye on that as well. Now we look at Datascope from WeatherFlow. We can see some of this gradient activity where we have 16 knots at Jekyll Island, Georgia. We have 18 knots here at Jacksonville Beach. Now, we always say it looks good on paper when it comes to winds and these low pressure systems and tropical cyclone development, but we have to really look at the data to find out what's going on. Now, if we look at Jacksonville Pier, you can see how jumpy this wind is, and that's because the gradient is flexing in and out with this low pressure. Even though it's so close, we can't really say that this is going to be a strong, solid wind, and especially with rain banding or even possible squalls, those winds tend to jump around quite a bit more. So it's not the most stable wind field that you can see when these low pressures develop or these tropical cyclones develop near the coastline, especially when they're heading to the northeast. The gradient is really in and out. If it was more stable and settled, where the system wasn't moving very much, we'd probably see an increased wind field with more consistency. However, this one is actually on the move and not expected to produce very much out of it. Now, right now we see in Charleston Harbor, we have 10 knots, and you can see a little bit of jumpiness already where this gradient is starting to flex in and out, and the wind directions are also jumpy as well. We're seeing easterly lanes off of north-northeast offshore flows. And let's go to the Isle of Palms Pier. Now this is land shadow. It's less at 7 knots right now. But you can see the jumpiness in the wind field there as well, with these easterly leans showing the higher builds and then the offshore winds showing the lower builds. And that's mostly for, like I said, land shadowing. But for today, for the winds, this is what's going to be very tricky. And we can even run the models to see what they're going to say. And you'll see some of the medium resolution models, they tend to smooth out the winds. But we'll see the higher resolution models should show some of these pulses in the wind field today. So let's let these load for just a second here. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we are in the models. This is our model suite, the North American model, 5 kilometers. The green, the high resolution rapid refresh, 3 kilometers in the red. This is the highest resolution model in the suite, and the 5 kilometer is the second to highest. We also have the Wharf 5 kilometer here in the gray, and that's also a high resolution model as well. So I tend to look at those a little bit more than the other ones, simply because these features near the coastline, they pick up on them much better than these medium or long range resolution models. So we see the green, the North American, you see how jumpy that is, and we also see the red one behind it. That's the HER model 3K, and both of those are showing a pretty jumpy wind field. Now they do show elevations in the winds, but you can see some of these leans today are barely on shore, with some east-northeasterly flow, and then you see backing to northeast and even north-northeast winds. So we have to be very careful with that, because it takes about 55 degrees of angle of the wind before it actually is side to side on, and that's very important for those that use the beach as a safety net, because you always want to have an onshore flow of wind, especially for the kite boarders, to be able to get back to shore if something goes wrong. So just keep that in mind today if you're out there, to keep an eye on the sensors for trends that we have. Right now it's north-northeast at 18 degrees, and we can see this right here that tells you what the azimuth is. So we really want to see 55 degrees or more, especially here at Sullivan's Island and Folly Beach, where these winds are actually at an onshore angle. So that's definitely something to watch. These wind fields from the low pressures or cyclone activities tend to be very jumpy, so they're not going to stick for very long. Right now we see an east-northeast flow offshore at the Charleston buoy. That seems to be pretty solid for now. However, that's a little bit closer to that low pressure. Now if the low pressure jogs a little bit more northward, we'll see this easterly flow meet the coastline. And if we do get some sunshine in today, we'll see some of these backdoor sea breezing effects help that wind lean in on shore. So it's very much up in the air today as far as a strong wind field. I think it could go either way. Now with the onshore leans, we may see upper teens to near 20 and possibly even low 20s in spikes, with some of the spikes gusting up over 30 miles an hour. But we'll have to wait and see for this afternoon to see what the gradient build is going to be. And we'll say for today, I'm going to err on the side of caution. I'm going to call it on a little bit lower side at 14 to 18. And maybe even 11 to 18 knots with the jumpiness in it. And then with the onshore leans during the afternoon, we could see some upper teens. So not a very stable forecast for today. But like I said, watch the sensors for trends. Okay, as we get into tomorrow, I do think that we're probably going to see this wind field start to back down as the low pressure exits the area. So if we go back to our surface map, this low pressure, as it slides off to the northeast, the wind field will start to relax here as this high pressure erodes and our wind field starts to sort of fade out, and we'll probably see those northerlies drop down to low teens or possibly even single digits by late tomorrow afternoon and into the evening. Now we get into Sunday, this frontal boundary is coming. It's going to be a very weak ridge of high pressure squeezed in between these two right here, so I'm not expecting very much there either. We may even see this frontal boundary push through quicker with this high pressure diving down behind it and see a westerly flow, but for right now we'll say north or even northwest winds fading down into the single digit ranges. And then as we get into Monday, that's when we start to see this high pressure driving down northerly winds again. So as this high pressure sets back up in the northeast United States, we'll see another shot of north or northeast winds start to build, and we could maybe call for 14 to 18 knots on Monday. It's a little bit early to tell. We may have to wait till Sunday to make a call on that, but I think it will strengthen as it hits the East Coast and stalls again, just like this last one. Okay, so that's it for the Chucktown wind report, I do want to take a look at the Charleston radar real quick. Okay, rains are going to be in and out today, intermittent. We may see some spotty showers here and there. Most of the coastline is staying dry because there's a dry air line inland that is holding it back. So I think a lot of these rains, just like yesterday, will be limited strictly to the beaches. Okay, on to the tropics. Here's this area that the National Hurricane Center has circled with a low percentage in the next 2 days and a higher percentage in the next 4 days as it stays along the Gulf Stream. So I think by the time that it starts to get its act together, it may be already to our east or even pushing off to the northeast. This other area disturbance over here, this is Invest 95. It's actually tropical depression number 9. So the next name of the storm is Ida, and then after that's Joaquin. So if this one makes it before this one, this will be Ida, and then this will be Joaquin, or vice versa. So looking at the numerical charts, that might be getting a little bit ahead. Let's look at the tropical Atlantic. Okay, here's this area here. We also have, here's tropical depression number 9, which could become Ida today. And then we have another area right here to its southeast that is starting to organize today. I would expect that National Hurricane Center would probably give this area maybe the Invest 96 label or even tropical depression label because it looks rather impressive. The upper air shear environment for this area is very hostile. I don't expect anything developing here to hold up for very long, and you can see here that the surface low on tropical depression number 9 is actually ahead of the convection here, so a lot of these cloud tops are being blown off to the northeast. Okay, looking at the precipitable water, lots of moisture along the intertropical convergence zone as usual, and then as we get over here to the southeast coast where this area is, we can see a little bit of spin right here at the very end of this loop, where that moisture is actually feeding up from the easterly trade. So there is enough moisture there and warmth over the Gulf Stream to have a surface low, and I do expect that will happen. However, the upper level airstream is not favorable for development because of upper level shear. So here's the Saharan air layer, very relaxed on the dust right now, very modest, pretty much light, and this goes all the way across the intertropical convergence zone. So this would be a favorable area for surface rotations or surface circulations to develop for tropical cyclones, but the upper level shear is just going to be too much for these. I think we'll see a lot of these little spins and then they'll dissipate over time. Okay, earth.nullschool.net. Then we're going to take a quick peek at this. Here's our surface low off the coast, and as we go up in the atmosphere, I want to go all the way up to 250 millibars to show you what the trend is going to be. Now we do have an upper trough or a shortwave trough that is sort of bending down right here, and this is what's going to help steer this storm away from the coastline because there's upper level shear coming up in this direction, and what that's going to do is it's going to pull this storm off to the northeast along its associated trough. So if we look at the upper level atmosphere at 250 HPA, we'll see these winds coming up from the southwest, and here's your shortwave trough that extends all the way down to the Gulf. And as time goes on, this trough will head towards the east as this high pressure and this next frontal boundary dive in behind it. So the upper level shear environment here along our coast right now is not very favorable, and that's why I say that the whole western side of this, whatever develops from this low pressure, will stay on the dry or the weakened side, and it will help drive the storm out into the ocean. So that will do it for the Chucktown wind report and the tropics update. Have a good weekend.